In the election of 1980, it was the race between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. Reagan had won the Republican nomination over Bush, while Carter held off the challenge from Kennedy. The Iran hostage crisis and the declining economy caused by high inflation and high unemployment rates gave Reagan the advantage in the election. The Republicans were able to win in a landslide, deeming Reagan the 40th President of the United States. The elected President, Ronald Reagan, was also elected the Governor of California and was a former radio announcer and actor. He shifted his political views from liberal to conservative after losing money from his acting job due to taxes. In his presidency, he served from 1981 to 1989. He established his own domestic and economic policies called Reaganomics, which advocated for the tax reduction and the promotion of unrestricted free market activity. He dealt with immigration reform, and his wife Nancy Reagan heavily campaigned the war on drugs or the Just Say No program. The end of the Iran hostage crisis came when Iranians saw little advantage in holding the hostages any longer. Carter had continued negotiations, and the hostages were freed after Reagan was inaugurated. Carter was part of the delegation that welcomed the hostages home. Reagan took an aggressive stance toward the Soviet Union after delivering his Evil Empire speech to the National Association of Evangelicals. He referred to the USSR as the Evil Empire. The Reagan Doctrine was also established, in which the U.S. supported anywhere in the world to support anti-communist activity. In the 1984 presidential election, Reagan was nominated for a second term. He was up against Mondale, who was the Democratic nomination. Reagan had already shown promise because he helped the U.S. come out of the 1981 to 1982 recession. His previous term had overseen a revival of national confidence and prestige. He won in a landslide, and he had carried 49 out of 50 states, becoming one of the two candidates to do so, the other being Richard Nixon. Geraldine Ferraro was the first woman nominated for a major office. In the 1988 election, Reagan was not able to serve a third term. Bush had been nominated for the Republicans, while Dukakis emerged as a Democratic nominee. Bush campaigned on good economy and Reagan's popularity. The campaign consisted of attack ads in which Dukakis failed to defend himself. The vice presidential debates were held in which the particular quote, "You're no Jack Kennedy," was said by Lloyd Bentsen to Dan Quayle after he compared himself to the former president. This saying became a way to deflate politicians perceived as thinking too highly of themselves. Overall, the Republicans won.
The lengthy war between the neighboring Middle Eastern countries of Iraq and Iran caused about 500,000 casualties and several $1 billion worth of damages, but eventually, neither side won. It should be noted that the Iraq-Iran war was deliberately started by Iraq dictator Saddam Hussein in September of 1980. Specifically, Saddam felt threatened by the Islamic Revolution, which had brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power in Iran. However, on the other hand, Ayatollah saw Saddam as a brutal Sunni tyrant oppressing Iraq's Shia majority and expressed his desire to topple Saddam from leadership position in Iraq. Thus, Saddam started the war for the following purpose: to overthrow Ayatollah's regime before the regime can overthrow him. This war consisted of ballistic missile attacks, large use of chemical weapons, and assault on third-country oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. Eventually, the Iran-Iraq War did end in 1988 with the acceptance of the UN Resolution 598. In regards to U.S. involvement, it was a complex situation since it was neutral because it had no relation to either Iran or Iraq. But as always, the main concerns of the U.S. during this time was the Soviet Union and the spread of communism across the world. When the Iraqi Communist Party began calling for the end of the war in 1981, Saddam responded by restraining the party and jailing and killing its members. The U.S. saw this as a sign that Saddam was worried about Soviet influence. Thus, they removed Iraq from the list of countries that sponsored terrorism, restored relations with Iraq, and approved the sale of Boeing jetliners to Iraq. Furthermore, in 1963, a terrorist group called Hezbollah took some Western hostages, and 6 of them were American. A moderate group of Iranian leaders discreetly approached the U.S. and offered to negotiate with the Hezbollah for the release of the hostages. However, In exchange, the US would sell arms to Iran. Thus, the US was secretly selling weapons to Iran, and they were using this profit to fund rebel fighters in Nicaragua against the communist government there. When Reagan took office in 1981, his administration was worried about the Sandinistas regime, a leftist government that took power in Nicaragua in 1979. Furthermore, in El Salvador, the administration was also worried about a growing civil war between the government forces and leftist rebels. For both conflicts, the Reagan administration was convinced that the Soviet Union was the source of the troubles in both nations. To address the conflict in Nicaragua, Reagan officials began to covertly assist the Contras rebel forces that opposed the Sandinista regime. Moreover, to address the situation in El Salvador, the U.S. increased its military assistance to the nation and provided U.S. advisors to the Salvadoran army. Despite this address of the situation, the conflict in El Salvador began to escalate quickly. During the Lebanese Civil War, forces from many nations, including 800 U.S. Marines, landed in Beirut to supervise the Palestinian withdrawal from Lebanon. This event marked the beginning of a mission that was stretched into 17 months and left 262 servicemen dead. To start off, the Marines that were sent to Lebanon did leave the country on September 10th, but returned on September 29th following the massacre of Palestinian refugees by a Christian militia. Then, on the following day, the first Marine died while defusing a bomb during the mission. Then, on April 18, 1983, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut was destroyed by a car bomb, killing 63 people, including 17 Americans. Then, on October 23, 1983, Lebanese terrorists committed an attack into the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, which killed 241 U.S. military personnel. Finally, on February 7, 1984, Ronald Reagan announced the end of U.S. participation in the peacekeeping force in Lebanon.
Good evening, this is NBC News, and let's hear from Venetia Cano on Wall Street.
This is Wall Street. Okay, in regards to economy, currently the country is experiencing a recession. So, President Reagan has implemented his economic... Okay, I need action. So we are currently at Wall Street. Now let's talk about the health of the economy, which is not good. Currently, our country is experiencing a recession. So President Reagan established Reaganomics, which cuts taxes for the top 1%, which is mostly CEOs. So we are currently at Wall Street. So now let's talk about the health of our economy, which is not good since we are at a recession. To fix this recession, Reagan established Reaganomics, which cuts taxes for the top 1%, which are mostly CEOs, so they can expand their business and hire more workers. Essentially, he wants to promote economic growth by increasing the unemployment rate. Thank you. This is Venetia, live at Wall Street.
guys, welcome to the Oprah Winfrey Show!
Yes!
How's everyone doing this fine morning?
Good!
So we have two best friends here for the first time on my show. Can you say your name and where you're from?
Diane Nicholas from Bergenfield, New Jersey.
And what's your name and where are you from?
Venetia Canna from Bergenfield. Go Bears!
We're only getting started down here at the Oprah Winfrey Show, so stay tuned for more. Thanks, everybody!
So I'm Venetia Canna from NBC News, and we are here with Oprah Winfrey.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Venetia.
So the first question I would like to ask you is so going back to your college years, did you know you wanted to be in journalism?
Actually, I didn't know at all. I started working in radio when I was 16, and I got a job there, and it was a local job. It was just in my town, and then my freshman year of college, they started asking me, different stations started asking me if I wanted to work into television, and my plan originally was to become a teacher, and then I got into journalism, television, and radio, and that's just basically how it started.
That's really cool. So how's your work and life in television, and would you ever want to go back to teaching?
I don't think I would ever go back to teaching because once I got into television, I actually realized how talented and good I was in the television field. I quickly became a news reporter, and that helped me expand my field of television, journalism, and radio, which were all things I was extremely passionate about. I feel like teaching was just something that I wanted to do when I was younger and as a kid, but once I actually started learning about journalism and television, I was actually really interested in it. Was my calling.
So how do you like having your own talk show?
Having a talk show at first was extremely stressful because I didn't want to have a talk show. I was actually being demoted from a news reporter, but they didn't want to fire me on my company, so they asked me to become a talk show host, and I actually did not like it at all. I didn't want to interview people, but actually I ended up enjoying it a lot.
So what lessons have you learned working in television?
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned working in television and just my career in general is that to always trust yourself and never let other people's opinions of you and what they perceive of you try to bring down what you think you need. For example, a couple years back, I moved to Chicago for my job, and people were telling me, Oprah, don't go to Chicago. It's a racist city, and you're black, and you're a woman, and it's just not the place for you to be. And I ended up going to Chicago anyway because something inside me was telling me to do it. And I ended up pushing my career forward because I got a better job, and I was able to make more money. And my whole life people were telling me, oh, if you do this, you'll fail. But I knew for myself that that's what I needed. And if I knew for myself that doing that, I would push myself forward and better myself. So the biggest lesson is know what you want to do, know what you're like, and know what you want in life to succeed.
So the lesson is basically just do you and don't listen to other people say.
Yes, basically.
So how does it feel like being a minority in a business usually filled with white individuals?
So, being a minority is obviously something that I've been living with throughout my whole life. Not only am I African American, I'm also a woman, and as both these things, I feel like I could be attacked easily in such an industry which is male dominated, and usually there's not a lot of black people in it. But I also came from an extremely poor family, which always pushed me to keep going forward, especially since I don't want people to judge me on my skin color or my sex or my gender. So, for example, once I was in a room with all these older white males, and I was the only black woman, and I was relatively young, and I felt so happy. I wasn't scared, I was just happy because I felt like I could prove to people that I'm not what I seem, I'm stronger than this, and I could keep moving forward. And my skin color and who I am as a person and as a female does not define how I actually work. So
Yeah. Thank you, Oprah.
Thank you for having me.
ESPN SportsCenter began broadcasting on television in 1979. Prior to its debut, many relied on radio or what was covered on the news. Sports had its own channel. This platform made sports rivalries seem larger and more intense than ever before. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. The Celtics and the Lakers. This rivalry would pave the way for rivalries like Cavs and the Warriors today. Bo Jackson played football and baseball for Auburn University. In 1985, he won the Heisman Trophy. He is one of the few athletes to be an all-star player for both Major League Baseball and National Football League. In 1986, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers drafted Bo first overall in NFL, but he did not sign because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers violated the NCAA rules and would rule Bo ineligible for college athletics. After, he decided to enter the 1986 MLB draft, where he was picked in the 4th round by the Kansas City Royals. In 1987, he was drafted by the Los Angeles Raiders. This multi-talented athlete was featured in a Nike commercial where he played every sport. Bo was also featured in a Nintendo game called Tecmo Bowl, where his character was undefeatable. In the 1986 World Series, the New York Mets were playing against the Boston Red Sox. In Game 6, Bill Buckner's error cost the Red Sox the game. This eventually led to their demise in Game 7, where the Mets became champions. This further prolonged the curse of the Bambino.
Little roller up along first, behind the bag, it gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
In the 1980 Winter Olympics, the American hockey team, a group of collegiate amateurs, defeated the heavily favored reigning Soviet Union. This victory lifted America's spirits as the country has been in a recession and faced the Iran hostage crisis. This upset was called the Miracle on Ice.
McClanahan is there, the puck is still loose, 11 seconds, you've got 10 seconds, the countdown going on right now. Morrow, up to Schultz, 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable. Put on your red shoes and dance the blues.
Hi guys, it's me, Ria Jones, and today I'm going to be interviewing Madonna. Hello Madonna, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
Okay, so the first question that I have is, what would you like to ultimately achieve in your future?
I already told the class this on National American Dance Band, but I'll repeat it again and annoy everyone who was annoyed before. I said I wanted to conquer the world.
Okay, so my second question today is, how did you get into the music business?
When I started in the music business, it was kind of a roundabout thing. I came to New York to become a dancer. I was a dancer for like a professional company, and I did that for a while until I got bored of it. I wanted to sing still because like everyone told me I had a great voice and I should do something with it. So I decided I would get into musical theaters because I would still be dancing, you know, singing with the stage. But so I auditioned for that. Then I went to an audition for a world tour, and the record producer saw me and he was like, "You don't need to be here. You should go to Paris and you'll be a star there." So went to Paris, and that's basically how I got into the music business. But nothing really happened there at Paris. I just wrote some songs there. And I later came back to New York, and I made some guy teach me how to play guitar. And that's basically how I got in the music business.
That's a really interesting story. Okay, everyone. Madonna, thank you.
Forget about me. Don't you forget about me.
And I'll huff! And I'll puff! And I'll blow your house in! Here's Johnny.
Hi, what's your name? So who do you work for?
Darth Vader. Or as we call him in the office, Darth.
My baby, he don't talk sweet. He ain't got much to say. But he loves me, loves me, loves me. I know that he loves me anyway. And maybe he don't dress fine, but I don't really mind. 'Cause every time he pulls me near, I just wanna kiss. Let's hear it for the boy. Let's give the boy a hand, yeah. Let's hear it for my baby. You know you gotta understand, yeah. Oh, maybe he's no Romeo, but he's my loving one-man show. Oh, 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 oh. Let's hear it for the boy.
The biggest social issue of the 1980s was the spread of HIV and AIDS. In the year 1980, HIV may have already spread to 5 continents: North America, South America, Europe, Africa, and Australia. In this period, between 100,000 and 300,000 people were expected to be infected. In 1981, cases of a rare lung infection called PCP were found in 5 young, previously healthy gay men in Los Angeles. At the same time, there were reports of a group of men in New York and California with an unusually aggressive cancer named Kaposi sarcoma. By the end of the year, there were 270 reported cases of severe immune deficiency among gay men. 121 of those men had died. In June 1982, a group of cases among gay men in Southern California suggested that the cause of the immune deficiency was sexual, and the syndrome was initially called gay-related immune deficiency, or GRID. This, however, was false. In September, the CDC used the term AIDS, acquired immune deficiency syndrome, for the first time, describing it as a disease at least moderately predictive of a defect in cell-mediated immunity, occurring in a person with no known case for an diminished resistance to that disease. AIDS cases were also being reported in a number of European countries, and thus, oh my god. Initially, many people had difficulty believing in the AIDS disease because they still believed it was GRID and could only be passed on by homosexual partners. However, in January 1983, AIDS was reported among the female partners of men who had the disease, suggesting it could also be passed on via heterosexual sex. In June of 1983, it was also believed that AIDS could be passed on from mother to their children before, during, or shortly after birth. By September, the CDC identified all major routes of transmission of the disease and ruled out transmission by casual contact, food, water, air, or surfaces. The CDC also published their first set of recommended precautions for healthcare workers and allied health professionals to prevent AIDS transmission. In July of 1984, the CDC stated to avoid injecting drug use and sharing needles because AIDS could also be passed on through blood. In October of 1984, bathhouses and private sex clubs in San Francisco were closed due to high-risk sexual activity. New York and Los Angeles followed suit within a year. By the end of 1984, there had been 7,699 AIDS cases and 3,665 AIDS deaths in the U.S., with 762 cases reported in Europe. Previously, the disease that caused AIDS was known as HTLV-3/LAV. However, in May 1986, the International Committee of the Taxonomy of Viruses said that the virus that caused AIDS will now officially be called HIV, which stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus. From 1980 to 1989, the amount of AIDS cases in the U.S. and in the world began to increase more and more, and there seemed to be no hope in the future.